The Drakkar mercenaries drifted silently in the orbit of Vera 9, watching the small, barren colony below with a mixture of disdain and boredom. Their leader, Krothak, stared down at the planet from the bridge, his yellow eyes narrowing as he observed the still, bleak landscape. This would be an easy mission, he thought. The colony below consisted of nothing more than scattered mining settlements and unarmed civilians, rebellious and irritating to the client who had hired them. Krothak relished the idea of crushing their weak little uprisings swiftly, maintaining the Drakkar's brutal reputation. His second-in-command approached, giving a brief report on the recon teams they deployed to the surface. As expected, the colony had shown no immediate resistance. No guards, no weaponry, nothing but bare-bones mining equipment and a few temporary shelters. Krothak's confidence only grew. These colonists wouldn't stand a chance against the might of his elite forces. But as the recon units continued their sweep, there was an odd silence. The open channels remained quiet, with only the occasional static-filled hum. It didn't take long before that silence was broken in a way Krothak didn't expect. There were voices now, clipped and hurried, filtering through the static in a language common across the galaxy. His scouts reported movement, blurred glimpses of shadows moving fast, too fast to follow. A strange unease stirred through the Drakkar's ranks as one unit after another sent frantic messages, only to fall silent mid-sentence. "There's something here. Shadows, moving in the trees. Can't see it, but it's there." One by one, Krothak's veteran recon teams were being picked off, leaving only incomplete, terrified transmissions in their wake. The silence after each transmission was unnerving, far more than Krothak would admit to his warriors. He snarled, passing off the strange reports as amateur mistakes or faulty equipment, but a small voice of doubt nagged at him. They were Drakkar, nothing in the galaxy could scare them. But what could be causing these reports? And why had each unit fallen silent so quickly? Krothak was certain it had to be a local animal, or maybe the colonists themselves, using the shadows to their advantage. He ordered his remaining scouts to widen their search perimeter, eager to flush out whoever, or whatever, was hiding down there. There was no reason to fear the weak, defenseless beings of Vera 9, after all. But as the next hours wore on, the messages from the surface didn't stop. "Spotted movement. Human origin, unknown weaponry," came another hushed report, quickly followed by another sudden silence. A mocking sneer curled on Krothak's face. He dismissed the notion that a mere human could be responsible for the unease rippling through his ranks. Humans were known for their fragility, their weakness. It was almost laughable to think that one of them would attempt to challenge the Drakkar. But as the reports trickled in, a new realization began to gnaw at his confidence. What Krothak didn't know was that the human they were dealing with wasn't just any ordinary colonist. He was a Green Beret, Sergeant Owen Marshall, a warrior who had trained for years to survive against the odds and make his enemies regret ever underestimating him. Owen had been on Vera 9 for several weeks now, cut off from his unit due to an unexpected accident. Left stranded, he had made the planet his own and had been watching over the colony as if it were his responsibility. When he noticed the strange ships in the sky, he had prepared the best he could, using every tactic he'd learned to turn the environment to his advantage. Owen knew the forest, the paths, and every hiding place by heart, and now, the aliens had walked right into his domain. As the Drakkar pushed forward, more of Krothak's best soldiers disappeared into the silent trees, leaving only the faintest trace of their presence: a snapped branch, a hint of disturbed earth, a chillingly abandoned weapon. His men were finding more than they'd bargained for in the dense, dark landscape, with every shadow seeming to hold an unseen threat. The once fearless mercenaries began murmuring to each other, casting wary glances around, watching the trees as if they were alive and watching them in return. The tension climbed as each remaining squad relayed similar stories. "Trap!" hissed one mercenary into the comms just before his signal cut out. They encountered pit traps, snare lines, and other tricks that were crude but devastatingly effective, expertly laid to cripple and isolate each soldier. The Drakkar were equipped with advanced weaponry, technology far beyond that of any human, yet every time they stepped into another snare, they found themselves outsmarted by something they couldn't predict. For every step forward, they paid a toll in lives, and the invisible force that hunted them began to weigh on their minds like a thick, oppressive fog. At this point, even Krothak was struggling to dismiss the reports. The silence from his own soldiers felt almost mocking, as if the shadows themselves were laughing at him. Yet his pride refused to let him back down. He encouraged his men to keep pushing through the dense, twisted paths, promising them swift revenge against the unseen enemy. His pride wouldn't allow him to retreat, but as his numbers dwindled, so did his confidence. In a way he never experienced before, the powerful leader of the Drakkar mercenaries was beginning to feel something close to fear. He wouldn't admit it, but the nagging feeling refused to leave him as his remaining forces pushed deeper into the territory. The silence was broken yet again, but this time it wasn't static or hasty whispers. It was the chilling calm of a voice none of them recognized, one that seemed to carry a weight of calculated calm. "This is your last warning." The voice crackled through their calms, smooth and deliberate. "Leave, or be hunted. Hit that like button if you're the kind of person who makes the world a better place. Because trust me, you just made this video better too." Sergeant Owen Marshall watched from his hidden position in the dense undergrowth, his gaze sharp and unflinching. He had been on Vera 9 for what felt like an eternity, forced into survival mode after a sudden accident had separated him from his team. Adaptability was second nature to him, and he had quickly familiarized himself with the terrain, making it his new base of operations. For weeks, he'd honed his awareness of every path, every rustling leaf, every shadow that danced in the dim light filtering through the thick canopy. He understood the forest as if it were part of him, turning its natural structure into his own weapon. The colony of miners he'd found himself among had initially been wary of him, his military presence a strange addition to their simple way of life. But as he learned their routines and stories, Owen had come to respect their resilience. Though they had no formal defenses, they held a quiet strength he admired. When the alien mercenaries began to descend upon them, he made a vow to himself: he wouldn't let these people become casualties of alien greed. They were under his protection now, and that meant these Drakkar wouldn't get within a mile of them without paying a high price. Owen moved through the forest with a silent, calculated precision, setting traps and obstacles with an efficiency that betrayed years of training and discipline. His tactics were straightforward yet layered with a complexity that would be hard for any outsider to detect, let alone understand. To the Drakkar, his methods would seem crude, like makeshift tricks with no real impact. But every trap, every path he closed off, was an integral part of a larger strategy. He wasn't just blocking their path, he was leading them deeper, away from the colony and into the maze of his design, a place he controlled with unyielding focus. The first trap was set carefully, using natural elements he'd found around the forest. The Drakkar may have had technology beyond human capabilities, but their arrogance was blinding them to the simplest dangers. Owen knew the traps wouldn't take out the entire force, but that wasn't the goal. He needed them to question, to fear, to second-guess their every step. With each life they lost, he wanted the remaining soldiers to feel the shadows around them tightening like a noose, every movement weighed with uncertainty. As he observed, he noticed his first trap had claimed a victim, a Drakkar scout, taken down by a silent but deadly pitfall he'd covered with camouflaged foliage. The mercenary's comm device clattered, transmitting his brief gasp before falling silent. Owen felt a surge of grim satisfaction. One down, more to go. Moving silently, he pressed forward, setting up a second snare designed to bring the next group to a standstill. He knew how these mercenaries thought, assuming their numbers would protect them. But as he continued leading them through the woods, each step drained their confidence. By the time they'd encountered his fifth trap, the Drakkar were visibly rattled, pausing to scan their surroundings before taking each hesitant step. They weren't used to being prey. Owen could see it in their stance, the slight tremble in the fingers of those who thought themselves fearless. Krothak, their leader, was pressing them forward, but Owen could hear the growing strain in the alien's voice. To Krothak, this should have been a simple mission, and he was no doubt furious at this unexpected resistance. Every time one of his men fell silent, the the bitterness in Krothak's orders became more palpable. Owen could almost sense the commander's mounting desperation. It was a familiar feeling he'd seen in many adversaries before, the fear that came with knowing you were facing something you couldn't quite see, a threat that felt one step ahead no matter how hard you pushed. Owen continued his work, staying light on his feet, minimizing his presence with a precision that could have been an art form. He was a ghost to them, slipping through the trees, setting his snares with a calm determination that went undetected by even the most vigilant of Krothak's forces. The key to his strategy was to remain unpredictable, forcing them to question what could come next, keeping their minds as much of a battlefield as the forest itself. The more ground they covered, the more disoriented the Drakkar became, losing their usual cohesion. Owen was leading them in tight circles, weaving them through areas he'd prepped to perfection. Each one of them moved with a tension that weighed on their posture, their fear visible in every step. Owen could hear their low mutterings through the trees, voices shaky and uncertain, wondering aloud if this shadowy figure was more than a mere human. Another trap triggered, and he heard another of the mercenaries fall. This time, the noise was loud and panicked, a strangled shout before silence took hold once more. The rest of the squad froze, some exchanging hesitant looks, as if silently asking each other if pressing forward was worth it. Owen waited, watching as one brave soldier took a hesitant step forward, clearly trying to prove his courage to the others. The instant his foot hit the ground, a carefully concealed snare whipped around his leg, pulling him up into the air, leaving him dangling, helpless. His comrades looked up, and for the first time, Owen saw a flicker of real fear in their eyes. Krothak's voice cut through the forest as he ordered his men to press on. Owen could tell he was trying to keep control, to rally them. But the desperation in Krothak's tone gave Owen all the information he needed. The Drakkar leader was slipping, losing his hold over his warriors as their respect for him waned in the face of mounting fear. To the mercenaries, Krothak's commands were starting to sound more like a hollow reassurance than genuine leadership. Owen knew it was only a matter of time before his control shattered completely. As the afternoon wore on, Owen intensified his efforts, setting even more elaborate traps, each one calculated to add to the psychological pressure bearing down on the mercenaries. Every fallen soldier, every frantic whisper over the comms, every nervous hesitation made them all the more vulnerable. Owen could almost feel their fear as if it were tangible, thickening the air, slowing their movements. But even with their morale breaking, Owen knew Krothak wouldn't relent easily. Pride and fury would keep him pushing forward, determined to save face in front of his remaining soldiers. Owen decided to make his next move one that would push them over the edge, something that would force Krothak and his mercenaries to confront the reality that they were hopelessly outmatched. He approached a large tree, taking out a small, battered tool from his gear. With quick, precise movements, he carved a single line into the bark, a message for the Drakkar to find, a message that would finally shatter any remnants of their bravado. When he stepped back, the words etched into the tree were simple yet effective. Leave, or be hunted. He didn't wait to see them find it. Instead, he moved back into the shadows, blending once more into the forest, his work done. Krothak stared at the message carved into the tree, its blunt threat cutting through his last shreds of confidence. His men huddled nearby, their bodies tense and eyes flickering with fear. For the first time in his long career, he felt doubt gnawing at his resolve. No human had ever posed a challenge to the Drakkar, much less a lone, hidden adversary who was systematically dismantling their force with nothing but primitive traps and the forest itself. The words, "Leave or be hunted," were simple, yet they brought an undeniable truth crashing down on him. They were not the hunters here. They were the prey. He ordered his soldiers to spread out, determined to find the human who dared to challenge him. Pride drove him as much as fear now. His reputation was on the line, and he refused to let a single, unseen human humiliate him and his forces. His men, however, weren't so resolute. The constant losses, the eerie silence between each attack, and the knowledge that they couldn't see their enemy had worn them down. They shuffled into formation reluctantly, casting wary glances at the trees, half expecting the human to appear from the shadows at any moment. As they moved forward, Krothak attempted to regain control over the situation. He reminded his men that they were Drakkar, feared across the galaxy for their ruthlessness and strength. But his words fell flat. The silence that had once been a comforting backdrop to their stealth now felt oppressive, thick with a foreboding they couldn't shake. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves sent jolts through the ranks. Their nerves were frayed, their confidence shattered by the endless ambushes that left no trace of the attacker, only fallen comrades and the lurking sense of being watched. Minutes passed, and then another trap snapped shut, ensnaring yet another soldier. This one managed a strangled shout before falling silent, but his voice was enough to halt the entire group. Krothak barked at them to keep moving, but his voice lacked conviction. His men hesitated, glancing at him with doubt in their eyes. In their gaze, Krothak saw a reflection of his own growing fear. His usual bravado felt hollow, and he struggled to keep up the appearance of control. They were Drakkar. Why was one human able to do this to them? They continued moving, but the cohesion was gone. Every mercenary moved with an individual, frantic rhythm, driven by survival rather than loyalty. Krothak felt the shift. He had lost their respect, and now they were clinging to any hope of escaping this nightmare alive. The human wasn't just picking them off one by one, he was dismantling them mentally, exploiting their own arrogance against them. Each step forward felt like a step deeper into a trap they couldn't escape. Suddenly, a low hiss cut through the calms. One of the mercenaries had caught sight of something, a shadow moving between the trees, almost too fast to follow. But before they could react, the shadow disappeared, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. Krothak gritted his teeth, forcing himself to believe this was merely an illusion, that they were imagining things. But he could feel it too, a presence, silent and watching, always one step ahead. In a desperate attempt to lure out their hidden adversary, Krothak ordered his men to spread even wider, forming a loose perimeter. His logic was simple: the human couldn't possibly be everywhere at once, and a wider formation would limit the effectiveness of the traps. But as soon as they dispersed, Owen struck again, swift and calculated. Another Drakkar soldier fell, his scream echoing through the forest. This time, there was no pretense of confidence among the remaining mercenaries. The Drakkar were breaking, their fear now fully exposed. Krothak knew he was running out of options. His usual tactics, his tried-and-true methods, were utterly useless against this invisible adversary who seemed to know every move before they made it. And now, as he looked around at his shattered force, he faced a choice: continue this doomed pursuit or acknowledge defeat. He wanted nothing more than to call a retreat, to pull his men back and regroup, but his pride held him back. A Drakkar leader didn't retreat, not against a single human. But his hesitation cost him dearly. The human, sensing their indecision, intensified his attacks, striking from unpredictable angles and using the terrain to his advantage. The remaining mercenaries were frantic now, turning their weapons on every shadow, every rustle of leaves, desperate to regain control but only succeeding in wasting ammunition. Krothak tried to rally them, shouting orders, but his voice was drowned out by the rising panic. Then, in one final act of defiance, Krothak issued a command that he hoped would draw the human out. He demanded that the human show himself, that he face them directly if he dared. For a long, tense moment there was silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting. And then, from the shadows, Owen stepped into the light, calm and unflinching, his gaze piercing as he looked upon the remaining Drakkar with a quiet, terrifying certainty. The sight of him, a single human, standing alone against them, should have been laughable. But there was something in his posture, in his eyes, that made them freeze. He showed no fear, only a cold determination that seemed to cut through the bravado of every Drakkar still standing. They knew in that moment that this human was unlike any they had encountered. He wasn't here to fight for survival. He was here to hunt. The mercenaries faltered, their weapons trembling in their hands. Krothak felt a wave of dread wash over him as he stared into the eyes of the man who had systematically dismantled his force. It was a look of calm, unbreakable resolve, the kind that only came from someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not dealing with an ordinary human. This man was a soldier, a warrior with skills honed for exactly this kind of warfare. Krothak's pride finally shattered. He ordered a retreat, his voice barely a whisper as he instructed his remaining men to fall back. There was no point in continuing, not against an enemy who seemed to know their every move before they made it. The Drakkar stumbled backward, their once imposing formation reduced to a disorganized scramble for safety. They moved with a frantic urgency, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the human who had brought them to their knees. As they retreated, Owen remained standing, watching them with that same steady gaze. He didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. His message had been delivered, his victory complete. The Drakkar fled, their fear etched into their minds, a lesson they would carry back to their superiors, to anyone who would listen. The Drakkar mercenaries stumbled back through the forest, their retreat turning into a desperate scramble as they tried to escape the invisible terror they had faced. Krothak, their once proud leader, led the way, his gaze fixed ahead, unwilling to look back at the silent figure who had brought them to ruin. The humiliation gnawed at him, but fear overpowered his pride. For the first time in his career, Krothak understood what it meant to be prey, and he wanted nothing more than to put as much distance as possible between himself and the human who had dismantled his forces with ease. Behind them, the forest grew quieter, each Drakkar mercenary too shaken to speak. The reality of their defeat hung over them, a heavy weight pressing down with each step. Their eyes, once bright with arrogance, now darted nervously at every shadow, every rustle in the underbrush. None of them dared to break the silence, too afraid that the sound of their voices might somehow call the human back, a relentless specter they couldn't understand, let alone fight. They were warriors, yet they had been reduced to frightened deserters, their reputation shattered by a single human who had shown them no mercy. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, a grim silence settled over the remaining Drakkar. Krothak, still reeling, gathered his remaining forces to prepare for departure. Their numbers had been halved, their ranks thinned by the traps, ambushes, and relentless tactics of an enemy they had grossly underestimated. Krothak knew he'd face consequences upon returning, that their client would not look kindly upon failure. But no punishment could be as severe as the memory of the human's calm, unshaken gaze as he watched them flee. It was a sight that would haunt them long after they left Veranain. On the other side of the forest, the colony watched as the alien ships lifted off, relief washing over the faces of its people. They had been helpless in the face of the Drakkar's approach, relying solely on the protection of the man who had vowed to defend them. To the colonists, Owen was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of hope, an unwavering force that had shielded them from certain destruction. They gathered in quiet groups, exchanging whispers of gratitude and awe, knowing that without him, their home would have been lost. Owen emerged from the trees, moving quietly among the colonists, acknowledging their thanks with a simple nod. He had done his duty as he saw it, not for praise or recognition, but because it was what he believed to be right. The colony leader, a grizzled old miner who had been skeptical of Owen at first, approached him, offering a handshake that conveyed a silent understanding. Owen shook his hand, accepting the gesture with humility. To him, this was just another mission, another job completed. But for the colony, it was something much more. The miners would tell stories of the lone soldier who had defended them, painting a picture of a human warrior who had stood firm against alien mercenaries and emerged victorious. Owen's legend would live on in their memories, a tale that would be passed down, growing with each telling. The image of the human who had turned the forest into a fortress would become a part of their history, a story that would remind them of what one person could achieve, even against impossible odds. As Owen prepared to leave, he cast one last look at the forest, his silent battleground. He had no intention of staying. He had a team to get back to, and a duty that extended beyond Veranain. But he left the colony better prepared, showing them how to defend themselves, teaching them simple tactics that would give them a fighting chance if anyone tried to threaten them again. They watched him go, their protector fading back into the shadows as quietly as he had come, leaving behind only the memory of his deeds and the sense of security he had restored. Meanwhile, the Drakkar returned to their client, their pride diminished and their reputation tarnished. Krothak reported the mission's outcome in clipped, careful terms, glossing over the details of their defeat, but making one fact clear: the human presence on Vera 9 was not to be underestimated. He warned of humanity's resilience, a force he described with caution and a grudging respect that was unmistakable. The Drakkar, once dismissive of humans as weak and insignificant, now saw them as something far more complex. Humanity had shown them a side they had never expected, a combination of strategy, bravery, and an unyielding will that had left even the most ruthless mercenaries shaken. Krothak's report spread quickly through mercenary circles, each retelling amplifying the story until it became a whispered legend. The tale of the Green Beret on Vera 9, the human who had faced an entire Drakkar force and driven them back, took on a life of its own. Owen Marshall became a figure of myth among the Drakkar and other mercenaries, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and respect. To them, he was no longer just a soldier, he was a symbol of humanity's unexpected strength, a reminder that even the most unassuming species could hold devastating potential. Back in the galaxy, Owen's reputation began to spread beyond Vera 9, growing into a quiet but powerful warning to any who thought humanity could be easily conquered or intimidated. The stories painted him as a ghost, a shadow in the trees, a relentless force that had defied the odds and left an indelible mark on those who had underestimated him. His name became a part of the mercenary lexicon, a cautionary tale about the dangers of facing a human on their own terms. Among the Drakkar, his legend grew with every retelling, each mercenary adding their own embellishments until he became a near-mythic figure, one that no Drakkar would want to cross paths with. Owen Marshall, meanwhile, had no interest in his growing reputation. As he rejoined his team, he carried with him only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done what was right. He didn't see himself as a hero or a legend, just a soldier doing his duty. But the galaxy had its own way of honoring him, weaving his story into a legacy that would endure long after he had left Vera 9. And so, the name of the Green Beret who had defended a colony against alien mercenaries became a part of intergalactic history. The Drakkar, once feared as ruthless hunters, now held a deep-seated respect and fear for humanity. In the quiet corridors of their ships and in the dimly lit corners of their strongholds, they told stories of the human who had shown them what it meant to be hunted, what it meant to face an opponent who could turn the very ground beneath their feet into a weapon. In the end, Owen Marshall's story became more than just a tale of one man's victory. It became a symbol of humanity's resilience, a testament to the strength that lay hidden beneath the surface, ready to rise against any who dared to challenge it. And across the galaxy, those who heard his story were left with one clear and powerful lesson: never underestimate a human.